Good afternoon and welcome to today's Understood.org interview on the use of terms dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia in our schools. I am so excited to be joined today by Michael Yudin. Welcome.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's great to be here.
Michael is the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services at the Department of Education. He is our nation's top official overseeing the implementation of special education in our nation. We're so excited to have you. And today we are going to discuss the department's recent guidance, which was released in October, which was Learning Disabilities, Dyslexia, and ADHD Awareness Month. The guidance discusses our public schools using the terms dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. But before we begin, would you mind sharing some information about your job, what it is you do here at the department, and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So, hello everyone, I'm Michael Yudin. I am the Assistant Secretary here for the Office of Special Ed and Rehab Services at the U.S. Department of Education. The mission of our office is actually to ensure access to and excellence in education and employment. We do this through a variety of means. We provide grants and resources, technical assistance, supports, cradle through career. We administer both the programs under IDEA, special education, as well as the vocational rehabilitation program. So we provide supports and resources for infants and toddlers with disabilities and delays, preschool, of course, the special ed program, and the vocational rehabilitation program.
Wow, huge. And what about your background? How did you come to this position, Michael?
So I'm a lucky guy. This is a great job. This is a great opportunity to support parents and educators and ultimately do everything we can to improve outcomes for kids. I am a lawyer by background. I've been working in and out of disability pretty much since I was a kid. Went on to work at Social Security Administration, Department of Labor for a number of years. But then I went and spent 10 years working in the U.S. Senate, where I had the opportunity to work on the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, IDEA, Head Start, Higher Ed, Perkins, and Career Technical Education, and other pieces of education legislation. The administration came in and they asked if I would come over here, and I've been here for about 5 years now.
That's great.
And heading up this office for the past 3.
Wow, that's great. You know, I think it's so important to so many parents to hear that you have such a broad background, not just in disability, but also in many other portions of workforce, general education, because it's so important increasingly as those braid together.
Absolutely, right? I mean, we so often operate in silos, and life isn't like that for families and for kids. And, you know, particularly for kids with disabilities, we need to start early. We need to start planning, transition early. So all of those things are absolutely critical to making sure we get the kids prepared for success in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
let's turn our discussion to the letter. And I think, you know, that from our perspective, both on Understood.org and also NCLD, we've seen tremendous response from parents, applause that the letter is there, a lot of good information and response from educators as well. Can you describe for us a little bit about how the department determined it was important to clarify the law in this way?
Yeah, so we know there are about 2.5 million kids in special education with learning disabilities. We know from years of research that kids with disabilities, particularly struggling learners with disabilities, can absolutely succeed at grade level work with the right kinds of interventions and supports and instruction. But unfortunately, we know that too many of our kids are not succeeding. So we have these achievement gaps that just are unnecessary. There's no need for them. The kids aren't getting the supports and services that they need to be successful at grade level. So we know kids can work with can achieve and succeed at grade level work with the right kinds of intervention supports. So we need to make sure that they're getting them. We've heard from educators and parents that clearly there was a misunderstanding or not a clear understanding of how to use the terms dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia in the law when talking about special education. We know that it is, you know, we need to kind of bridge those gaps. We heard from NCLD, we heard from parents loud and clear that there was this challenge that they were having a really difficult time working with educators to understand how the needs of their kids were being met without using the terms dyslexia and dysgraphia and dyscalculia. And, you know, I'm going to echo the words of Dr. King, actually, but when educators and families and community leaders like NCLD get together to actually solve problems and solve kids' problems, they can unlock the great vaults of opportunity, as Dr. King said at the March on Washington. So, I mean, we saw this as a really critical opportunity. First, we know kids are not achieving at the place that we know they can be and should be. And two, there was this disconnect between parents and educators, and we thought it was really important to kind of bridge that gap.
Great. I think the letter, the way that it's set forward, does a really nice job of braiding this language into IDEA and the evaluation, the IEP, in all of the places where it could be useful if it's appropriate. So I wonder if you could just clarify for us something that is, it's a top concern, I think it was among the population that we work with, and that is, the letter does make clear that there should be no reason that a school district, a state, anyone else should have a policy that prohibits the use of any of these terms. Is that true? Absolutely.
So, there's nothing in the law, there's nothing in IDEA in the law itself or our regs that prohibit the use of the terms dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And in fact, the IDEA actually defines a specific learning disability as including dyslexia. It's not an exhaustive list, it doesn't include some of those other terms, but we know that those are conditions. So there's nothing in the IDEA in of itself that prohibits the use of these terms. In fact, we know that IDEA actually requires IEP teams and schools to really think about what are the unique educational needs of a child. And that's hard to get at if you don't really understand the underlying condition, right? So we need to make sure that in order to address the unique educational needs, we need to understand the disability, how the disability impacts the child's learning. So that's a really critical point here. So what we say in the letter is that, it is absolutely appropriate to use the terms dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia when determining eligibility, when conducting evaluations, and when developing IEPs. And we also make it pretty clear that we're encouraging states and districts to look at their policies, review their policies, and if they are in fact prohibiting the use of these terms, then they should revise those policies.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think so many of the issues that we all know working in special education are about communication between families and schools, that we're all trying to get kids increased achievement and access to what they need. So we really feel this is just a great way to remove a barrier, what appeared sort of as a barrier. And we're pleased the department chose to recognize that and speak about it. I want to also ask you, I think that what is so critical about the letter is a discussion of something you just referred to, what we kind of call the I in IEP, so that the discussion wouldn't stop at the terms dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, or any of the underlying conditions. But I think that process of really understanding what are the child's needs is something that's highlighted in the letter. Can you just emphasize that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the IDEA, the law requires that the IEP look at what is the disability and how it impacts the child's learning to identify what the unique educational needs of the child are. So as a part of FAPE, as a part of a free appropriate public education, states and schools are required to provide special ed and related services. And what those are the specially designed instruction, the accommodations, the supplementary aids and supports and services, modifications that school personnel may need to help meet the needs of the kid and ensure that the child actually has the opportunity to be involved in and make progress in the general curriculum. So the I in the IEP is how do we take what the kid's disability is, how does it impact the learning, and really develop the individualized supports and services, the intensive instruction, the accommodations that are necessary to meaningfully access the general curriculum, to meaningfully be involved in and make progress in the general curriculum.
I think some parents may wonder, now that my school is acknowledging or is agreeing to place this information in the IEP and to allow it to help enrich the discussion, should they expect to see the IEP change just based on the word that's included in there?
So not maybe, but not necessarily, right? Like, so again, the whole purpose of the IEP and the purpose of, frankly, the letter that we wrote is to ensure that the IEP team understands the condition, how the disability impacts the child's ability to learn, how the condition, impacts the child's unique educational needs. So that's the key word, right? Unique educational needs. And then the IEP team has the responsibility to identify the appropriate supports or services, and that is what is individualized. So maybe it does lead to, okay, we now know that this child has dyslexia, and everybody in the IEP clearly articulates that the child has dyslexia. That's really, first of all, important for the general ed teachers and others that may not be involved in the IEP team to know. But then you develop what are the appropriate supports and services to actually ensure that the child does have meaningful access to the general curriculum. And that's going to be individualized. IDEA doesn't identify, require, or prescribe particular supports or services. That's the whole kind of individualized nature of IDEA and really the heart of IDEA.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. One concern we would have, we would never want there to be, you use a term in an IEP, now dyslexia is in there, we've checked the box that we've got it, and we're going to, and as opposed to taking a deep understanding look at what is this, is it decoding, is it, what kind of, is it orthographic, we hope that there can be a rich discussion around kind of what it is. So I think that the letter does a great job by weaving it into the discussions and saying it's one piece of that. And so I'm happy to hear
it's an important piece of information that helps the IEP team, that helps the teachers and the parents understand, all right, how do we ultimately ensure that this child has the opportunity to be successful?
That's great. That brings up another question. You know, some of our parents, or some parents have written in on Facebook in response to learning that you were going to join us and seeing information about the letter. And one question that they have often asked is, what if well, there's two questions. The first is, will specific learning disabilities still appear on my IEP, even if I have a diagnosis of dyslexia? And now the school district is acknowledging that. So can you talk about why will specific learning disabilities still appear on an IEP, and why would that be?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's actually a critically important part, because under IDEA, that is one of the criteria for eligibility for special education, is a specific learning disability. And then it goes on to describe, as I mentioned earlier, some of the types of specific learning disabilities, which in the regs itself says dyslexia is one of them. But again, dysgraphia, dyscalculia are others. But the specific learning disability is the type or is the category of eligibility, so that kids do have the opportunity to get the special ed related services, the individualized instruction, the supports that they are in fact entitled to under the law. As you may know, as I know you know, and parents may know, IDEA is a right. There's an entitlement to a free, appropriate public education, and that's the gateway into that free, appropriate public education, is through eligibility and specific learning disabilities in particular.
Great. So the letter is a public letter?
Yes.
Right? I think we have it on Understood. Do these letters get put on the department's website as well?
Yeah, so it is on our website.
Is it? Okay.
Yep, it is absolutely on our website. If you go to the OSER's homepage, it's actually pretty front and center. Terrific. On that. We actually also did a blog on the Department of Ed's main website, and we actually had a cross-link to medium.org, which is another kind of social media vehicle. So we did a couple of blogs, actually. We had David Flink from Eye to Eye did a blog for us. We had some kids. So we've done a couple of blogs, and all of them also then have links to the guidance to the letter that you referred to. So you can go to the OSER's homepage, certainly could go to Understood. You can go to the Department of Ed's main homepage, and it should all be pretty easy to find.
Terrific.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of parents who have expressed excitement about this letter because maybe they've had some of these challenging conversations are asking, can we take it to our IEP meeting? Could we use it? And what would you think about that? It's a public letter, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the purpose of the letter was really to you mentioned barriers, right? There seemed to be this barrier. Well, that was the purpose of the letter, was to eliminate that barrier. That barrier was not necessary. The barrier is not doesn't have to be real. So if actually having the letter in your hand as a parent helps you bridge that gap or break down that barrier and say, look, it's very clear, right? So how do we work together as educators and parents to make sure that we all know we all want the best for my child? How do we meet the unique educational needs of my child? So absolutely, a parent should feel free to use that letter and any of the resources that we have available to help meet the needs of their child.
Terrific. There's one other thing I thought it was great to see in the letter, and I wonder if you can talk about this. There's an email address that you've set up. I think it's sld@ed.gov.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what are you envisioning that parents, it seems, could speak directly to the department through that?
Absolutely, and it's not really much more than that, right? It is a mechanism for parents to reach out to us with questions that they may have. We will answer those questions to provide us with information and resources. So it's really just a direct link for parents to us here at the department, and it's sld@ed.gov.
Terrific, great. And I wonder if you could talk also about another point that's made in the letter is that the department has a lot of resources for states and districts to look to understand what are evidence-based interventions for reading, what are evidence-based interventions for math, and how do we put in place some of these. Can you tell us, just highlight a few areas the department has invested in those?
Absolutely. So as you may know, we've invested for the last few years in what we call a National Center for Intensive Interventions, NCII we call it. And in fact, it is designed to support kids with intensive academic or behavioral needs, and it identifies the research-based strategies, the research-based interventions for kids that really do have the most intensive academic or behavioral needs. And that's actually whether they're in special ed or not, because a kid may or may not be identified, but may have some pretty intensive academic needs. So the National Center for Intensive Interventions, NCII, actually provides the research-based approaches to help ensure that educators as well as families understand but educators have the tools and the resources to utilize what we know actually works for kids. So that's one really important resource. We actually support a center on accessible materials. So, and folks may know it as Bookshare, right? We support a Bookshare program. Bookshare actually converts instructional material into a variety of formats, a variety of accessible formats, so kids can access the instructional materials in a variety of different ways. Lindsay, I've had the opportunity to meet with some kids that actually use the Bookshare program, and had the chance to talk to some of these kids, and it was phenomenal. These were juniors and seniors in a high school out in California, and they were enrolled in a dual enrollment program. Mm-hmm. So these kids were actually taking college level courses using Bookshare. And I had the chance to talk to these kids, and they told me that, just up until a couple of years ago, they were struggling. They couldn't keep up. They were very seriously considering dropping out. They were falling further and further behind. Each one of these kids had a story that was so, moving and personal that they were just struggling. And two things changed for these kids. One is they had a teacher who actually had higher expectations for them and knew what they were capable of, and then actually provided a mechanism to access the material, to access the curriculum in a way that made sense for them. And it's free. And these kids flourished. Mm-hmm. And again, like the seniors were all accepted into college at this point, 4-year colleges. The juniors all had viable paths to get there. So free to schools, free to kids, and a really, really great resource. We have a ton of resources around parent centers to help our parent centers. We have what's called the CIPR, the Center for Information and Parent Resources. So I think it's called parentcenterhub.org. It provides a wealth of really good resources for parents to navigate through IEPs and education reform and college and career ready standards and all of the things that are really critical. And one other thing I just would love to mention is we actually just released an online resource. It's called Ideas That Work, Preparing Children and Youth with Disabilities for Success. So Ideas That Work, and we can make sure that folks get the link to it, but it's an online resource that actually compiles all of what we know, all of the work that my office has funded over the last 30 years, all the great research-based strategies to how to support kids with disabilities academically as well as behaviorally. And you can click on links for educators, and then there are links for parents as well.
Great.
So how parents can understand what the research shows works for kids academically as well as behaviorally. So we'll make sure that your parents actually get the link and get the opportunity to use that.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we hear most from parents is this idea, why isn't research getting into my classroom? How do I help with that?
Yeah.
And so that's just amazing to hear. Absolutely, we'll make that and all of the other websites available. I know they're linked to in the letter itself, so they're already up on Understood, but we'll make sure that on NCLD and
Well, the
Understood we
new
get those
resource
out.
that I just talked about, the new website, is not in that letter because we
Right.
just released that actually last week at the earlier this week at the anniversary of IDEA,
That's
the 40th
right.
anniversary. So we've been working on that for actually probably about a year and a half
That's
to get those
terrific.
resources together
Great.
in a way that's actually usable for parents, that connects teachers and parents with the information that is hopefully in a meaningful and usable format for both educators and parents.
I wonder, you mentioned briefly the 40th anniversary of IDEA, that we celebrated that this month, and this week the department hosted some events and the White House hosted an event. I wonder, since we have you, this is a little off topic with this letter, but what do you think of as IDEA's greatest accomplishment, and what do you see in the future of our practice and where we're going, where we can anticipate moving?
Yeah, so 40 years ago, right, we were fighting to make sure that kids with disabilities actually had access to the classroom, to the schoolhouse. Rudd Turnbull actually spoke at the White House, and he was amazing, and he talked about his child with disabilities before IDEA was there, and he was so eloquent in describing watching the school bus come by and pick up all the other kids in the neighborhood and not his child, right? And that's, unthinkable today. So clearly just the whole access to the schoolhouse. But we've seen, improvements in technology, accountability, and clearly, improvements in academic achievement. We're now at a place where we can really begin to focus on how do we improve performance and outcomes and results of kids with disabilities. And 40 years ago, we were just, how do we get in the class? How do we get in the building? I read some remarks. I got a letter from a young woman who said what IDEA meant to her in this 40th anniversary, and I won't do her justice. She was far more eloquent than I will be. But she had disabilities, and IDEA provided her and her parent the tools to advocate for her needs, to understand that just because she had a disability doesn't mean she was disabled, right? She just learned differently. She thought differently and was absolutely capable, but it provided her the mechanism to advocate for her, what her supports were, what her accommodation needs were. She has since graduated from high school, has gone on to college, and is now enrolled in a master's program in child psychology. So clearly that's the success of IDEA. We got a lot further to go. As my opening remarks to you were, too many kids with disabilities, drop out of school. The achievement gaps between kids with disabilities and their non-disabled peers is far too big. Too many don't go on to college, don't graduate from college. Too many individuals with disabilities, frankly, live in poverty. And so we have so far to go. And when we think about, access, I think it's particularly important to focus on what does access to the general curriculum really mean. And it's not just access to the schoolhouse anymore, but it's really access to the same grade level work that kids without disabilities are getting.
Absolutely. That is so interesting. I think, that's a hard concept for many to understand. And I think it's a hard concept to implement in the classroom in some ways, because you've got many teachers are in rooms with 30 kids, all many different levels in that room. And I wonder, so I actually have two follow-up questions. The first, when we think about our teachers and educators, and we want to do everything to make sure they're prepared for these new situations. More and more kids with learning disabilities, with all disabilities, are included in the general education classroom. I wonder, I know we see that as a critical area, and a lot of parents with this letter wonder, they raised some issues on Facebook and in other areas saying, this will help with communication, but now I feel the next step needs to be, how can I help that educator have the access to the resources they need to be able to teach my child? Yeah. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, is the department working on educator preparation at all? Are there ways that they help inform educators about research-based education, or states to educators?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, just as a point of information, we provide direct resources to teacher preparation programs to actually prepare special ed teachers. So we have a whole set of resources and scholarships and stipends and personnel prep programs. But we also provide grants to states around professional development. We actually call them state professional development grants that go out to states to really support and strengthen the preparation of or the professional development needs of teachers using research-based strategies. We have a technical assistance center that's working with a number of states to actually better coordinate general ed teachers and special ed teachers. As you mentioned, Lindsay, right, we know that a majority of kids with disabilities spend about 80% of their time in the general ed classroom. Kids with disabilities are general ed kids first. So we need to make sure we're supporting general ed teachers. We know, for example, that multi-tiered systems of support like response to intervention on the academic side, or PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports, they use these multi-tiered systems of support to meet the needs of all of their kids. So it has to start in the general ed classroom with a teacher's ability, a general ed teacher's ability to differentiate instruction, right? Every kid learns differently, whether they have dyslexia or not. Every kid learns differently. And so we need to make sure that our teachers have the tools to really differentiate instruction to meet the needs of all of their kids in the classroom. And then when you have kids that do have, in fact, more intensive academic or behavioral needs, then we provide those more intensive supports. And that's, again, where the resources like this National Center on Intensive Intervention, NCII, comes into place, or the PBIS Center. And we know, and we actually, a good example of that is you have a child who's, let's say, in 8th grade, but is reading at a 4th grade level,
yes.
At a 4th grade level. And, all right, so the IEP team, the teachers have said, this kid has grade level comprehension. The kid can comprehend, but may have some challenges in fluency, for example. And so what we need to do is provide the intensive instruction to improve the fluency to get the child up to grade level, but the child can comprehend. So we need to make sure that the child is actually learning the content in all of his or her subject areas, but has access to technology, like Bookshare, for example, or other kinds of accommodations, more time. If the kid gets tired because he's reading too long and may need a break, there are a number of supports and accommodations to ensure access to the general curriculum so the kid can actually learn science and math and history, but may need those intensive supports around fluency, and that's what we're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I was just going to ask you that. I think that's one of the hardest things for people to get is when my child is in 8th grade, but they're reading at a 4th grade level, how physically will the school remediate? How will they provide the support to get either for decoding or fluency or comprehension, but also still allow that child to access the content? And that I think is one of the biggest challenges we face, in addition to this sort of idea of teacher preparation. Do our teachers have access to everything they need, given they see so many different students? So I wonder, this point about access to the general ed curriculum, it very much sounds like that is access to a regular high school diploma.
That's right.
That is access to kind of the ability to be on the path that qualifies you to go to college.
That's exactly
The
right.
department released another guidance letter this week, coinciding with the 40th anniversary of
Yes.
IDEA, and it was about access to the general education curriculum. This is for all students with disabilities, and I think it's really important to our parent audience to understand, what does that mean? Can you talk about that letter, why you felt it was important to put it out, what the point of it is?
Yeah, we know that too often kids with disabilities are not achieving at the level that they can be and should be. We know from research that, again, kids that are struggling learners with disabilities with the right kinds of interventions and supports can absolutely achieve grade level work. Mm-hmm. Too many are not, unfortunately, and we know that that's a gap in what we know is possible, we know can happen, but it is the gap from what is actually happening. So we know too often IEPs or teachers, IEP teams set low expectations for kids. We know when expectations are low, kids too often don't have access to that grade level work that prepares them to graduate from high school with the skills and the knowledge to master that information that prepares them for college and careers in life after high school. So what we said in this letter is that we wanted to clarify that for students with disabilities, it absolutely means access to the general curriculum. So when you are developing your IEPs, when you are working through your IEPs, it should be designed to enable the child to be involved in and make progress in the general curriculum. And that general curriculum is the same curriculum that applies to every other kid in the classroom. It's the same curriculum that applies to non-disabled kids, that's based on the state's standards for the grade in which the child's enrolled. So regardless of the nature of the severity of the disability, we want to make sure that that kid has the opportunity to access the grade level work. And that's what this guidance clarifies.
I think there's an interesting thing in there, and this is what gets at, I think, many parent fears and concerns. And you use the letter from the department talks about closing the gaps. You referred initially to the achievement gaps. Yeah. I think that gets it right at parents' fears. When they go in and meet and they think, my kid, this kid who I love and who is smart and who I see being capable in all these ways, but then I see big gaps in areas where they're not achieving, and I think it's a challenge for everyone to figure out, how do we close them? But you directly address that the IEP must discuss that it must talk about and plan for. I think it's achievable, but ambitious, but achievable goals.
That's exactly right.
But goals that would lead to closing that gap.
That's exactly right? So if a child is 3 or 4 grade levels behind, right? If the kid is in 8th grade, if the child is in 8th grade, but is reading at a 4th or 5th grade level, it may not be reasonable, right, to expect in 1 year the child's going to make 3 grade levels of progress. Mm-hmm. But we want to make sure that the IEP team with the parents and the educators are working together to say, all right, what's the goal? The goal has to be, how are we going to catch the kid up? Mm-hmm. How is ultimately the child going to meet standards so he or she does have the opportunity to graduate with a regular diploma? So we say that when you're doing your annual goals, they should be ambitious but achievable, and to help close that gap. So let's think about, all right, can that child make a year and a half worth of progress or growth in a particular year, and what are we going to do to get that child there, but ultimately with the goal of catching that child up so that he or she can in fact meet grade level standards.
Right. I think that I think that sets a great tone for that discussion. I think we hear a lot from families and from educators that the IEP can be too deficit focused, but it's not. It isn't an IEP that the way, when you can hear a phrase like high expectations and think, what does that mean, right? Yeah. But what it means is your kid will graduate from high school.
That's exactly right.
And so it sounds like this, I think what this does is it sets a tone for that to say, we're not going to give up. We're going to plan. If we have to get there, then what's the path that's going to get us there?
That's exactly right, Lindsay. That's exactly right. I couldn't say it better than you just did.
I think that could be so groundbreaking because I'm not sure that happens all the time. I think because it can feel overwhelming. But
in fact, we know it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we know
in
communities and states around the country, they don't think about what the standards are, the state standards, the grade level standards, what are the knowledge and skills that a child needs to promote to the next grade and ultimately graduate from high school. And IEPs teams often don't consider that, and we unfortunately know in too many cases IEP teams just say, all right, whatever they determine goals that are not based on the standards, not based on what the kid needs to actually get to standards and ultimately graduate from high school. And too often we know kids are actually, IEP teams make decisions that set low expectations. So you know what, the kid is 4 grade levels below in reading, so it's probably not great that he does math.
Yeah.
But if the kid actually does have comprehension skills, then let's use technology. Let's provide some accommodations and ensure that the child does have access to the grade level work in science, and then work on the fluency and work on those other areas where the child needs some more intensive instruction and intervention. We were at the White House the other day and we met a young man named Noah who presented at the White House. This kid's going to be a great physicist one day, right? I mean, he's all interested in science. And how dare we deny that child the opportunity to excel and succeed at science because he has dyslexia? That's crazy. That can never happen. So we need to make sure that we're providing the supports and intensive instruction so that Noah or another child can actually improve his reading skills, but never deny the opportunity to learn those other content subjects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's that to me shows, I don't know what you think, but I think that to me that we're talking about it shows the success of IDEA.
Exactly.
Not that success is an end, that it's over. There's
not.
so much.
And it's not.
But wow, we're talking about that.
Yeah.
And it's incredible, and it's due to that incredible family and the educators who were there and everyone coming together, and it's a very exciting thing. So I think this other letter, it will set great tone for those conversations in a way that helps implement what is an expectation that's high. And NASD, there's great resources for the field. I mean, almost everybody supports standards-based IEPs. The National Association of State Directors of Special Education has some good stuff out there.
That's right.
And so that, I think, is something parents can ask for and understand and try to involve in their meetings.
That's exactly right. I think that's exactly right, Lindsay. That's the opportunity. The IEP, right, is the heart of special education. The individualized supports and services and instruction that is the entitlement under IDEA to a free, appropriate public education. That individualized instruction, those supports, they have to be designed to meet something, to achieve something, and those have to be grade level work. If it's not, then really what is meaningful about this education if it's not to ultimately get the child the opportunity to succeed and graduate from high school, college, and career ready?
Michael, we're so lucky to have this time with you today. Thank you so much for it. I want to ask, what would your message be to parents of children with learning and attention issues? If you could tell them, speak directly to them, what would you say?
That's I appreciate that. It's actually my privilege to be here. This is my great opportunity to provide parents with information and tools and resources, ultimately to empower parents. I mean, there's nothing more important than providing parents with the means to make a change in their child's life and the lives of their communities. I met a young woman who has a kid with some pretty significant disabilities, and she was trying to get her kid in an inclusive preschool, and she didn't. Her school district said, well, we don't really know how to do that, so we can provide your kid with an education over here. And she's like, no, I want, my expectation is my child's going to go to school with his friends and his peers and his brothers and sisters. And her expectation was that her kid's going to go to school like everybody else in the community. And the school's like, no, we can't do that. And she worked with her parent center. She learned what her rights were, what the resources were available, and she went to her school district, and actually they agreed, and they together, this one mother, this one parent with her school district, they created an inclusive preschool program in her school district. And she herself said, I am an agent of change. So with the information, with the support, with the tools, parents can do everything. They have the greatest opportunities to really make an impact, not only on their kids' lives, but the lives of their communities. So high expectations, changing the culture of expectations, and making sure that parents have everything they need at their disposal to make an impact on their kids' lives and their communities.
That's great. Thank you so much for being with us today. We cannot thank you enough for your time. I think this has gone a long way to helping our parents and myself understand kind of what the department means through the guidance, how the guidance can be used and helpful to parents and educators and communities in that goal. So thank you. We appreciate it so much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Again, it has truly been my privilege. So thank you.
I want to say thank you for watching and for joining us. We know there are a lot of unanswered questions that are still out there. There's going to be another event on December 3rd, and look for that event. We'll be taking more questions, talking about this same topic, and really trying to help parents and everyone in our audience and everyone out there understand how we can better address these issues and really use the letter to move this information forward and make things better for children and families. I also want to encourage you to go to u.org/calendar to watch any of our expert events. They're archived, and there is just some amazing content there. So we hope that you will check it out and share. Thanks so much.